Good evening, everybody, and welcome. We're talking today about the vicissitudes of the movement and confluence of life, and we are likening it to a stream of a river of our experience and how there are different currents in that experience. And sometimes we think that we're navigating toward a certain end in our life or a point in our life, and yet the boat is moving in a different direction, which is what it's like to actually navigate on the water, because the surface of the water could move in one direction while the subsurface begins to move in a different direction. And sometimes we head into confluences where whole different streams or tributaries come together and create kind of a confusion, whitewater. This meditation is also interesting because in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they have used the idea of flowing river as a metaphor for the mind and how the mind is affected by meditation. So classically, we begin our meditation like a waterfall and then go through white water and then slowly come down as a rolling mountain stream that then becomes into a calmer, more open river that eventually empties into a serene lake. And that's the idea, that it's pointing to people that they could begin to see their experience and begin to acknowledge it. Well, this is, my mind is agitated. It's like white water, and just like white water, you can't think your way through that. I jumped into white water once. It was crazy. It was absolutely insane. And yes, there was a little bit of inebriation involved, but it was also to save my dog, because my dog had fallen in and I didn't think twice about it. I had been drinking with a bunch of people on the shore and I just jumped in and absolutely was tossed around. The power of the water is insane. You can't think clearly. There's no way I could have saved the dog or done anything for the dog. I ended up just getting slammed against some rocks, and you know, I was fine, bruised and coughing up water and completely, you know, unable to figure out what was actually happening. But the first thing I remember seeing is my dog on the shore wagging her tail, like all excited, ready to jump in again. I was like, hell you say. But the experience of being in the white water is amazing because you can't do anything but just relax and go with it and let it take you, and then get the hell out as soon as you can. Often many people have that experience and can't get out, and that's a tragic situation. It's not recommended. But in terms of the metaphor, when our minds are that agitated, and I think we could all agree that we've experienced that occasionally, when the mind is just so agitated. I remember a meditation teacher saying once, go for a walk. Don't even try to meditate. You know, when you're like wound up like that, don't struggle with it. Don't fight it. Find the relaxing point and just get through it. And that's the advice all the way through working with the stream of our mind, is finding the kind of weight or ballast, is what they call it in the navigating terms, the kind of weight at the center of the bottom of a boat or a craft that keeps it secure in the water and allows it to navigate and maneuver through even difficult times. So the mind is up there going, oh my God, my God. But down inside, we could actually find a connection to our breath that begins to calm us and begins to slow the process. If you're having a panic attack, don't fight the mind. Don't sit there and try to figure it out. My recommendation is, and the recommendation of meditation teachers for a long time now, has been to turn the attention from the mind to the body, because calming the body will allow the mind to begin to calm. If you're tense and irritated and agitated and you try to get your mind to comply, that's a very, very difficult process. But you could simply turn your attention to the body and begin to breathe into the body to calm the body and bring yourself back to the present. When we meditate in the morning, what happens with a lot of people is they have a very psychological meditation. It's very conceptual. So they'll sit down and think, I should calm my mind, and my mind won't calm itself. And that's okay. But I recommend that you bring the other two tiers below the consciousness of the mind into play. The median tier of the heart center, experiencing the emotions, doing some heart work, and then I'll go more into that in a second. Or more physically, coming in contact with the just being with the body. There's an image that was used by Trungpa Rinpoche of the flagpole, if you know that image, that the flagpole stands quite still and quite calm, even when the flag is fluttering around and flopping around. So that the mind could actually be flipping around, but if you can find your posture and keep bringing the attention gently but insistently back to the rhythm of the breathing, the mind will eventually calm down. It will eventually relax a little bit. When the body becomes stable, the mind relaxes. When the mind can relax, then it releases its natural clarity. Then the mind does what it does best, which is to just see. Ironically, because there's so much ego involved, that we think our mind is best when it's thinking and working through and figuring it out. And we have this high gamma wave kind of stuff going on in our brain, and that activity is very seductive, you know? It makes us feel really engaged. But that is not the most effective and efficient way for the brain to work. The brain actually works the best in serenity, when it's connected to just the openness, and then it just sees, it just knows, it understands. And if the mind is relaxed and open enough, it can actually feel the heart center as well. So it feels and knows at the same time, if that makes sense. It feels, it knows, and the third level, it is. So the body is like a level of just being. And it's pre-consciousness. This brainstem was the first thing to be developed in higher organisms, the oldest system. That's why it's sometimes called the reptilian mind. I don't know how accurate that actually is, but it's the very oldest part of our system. And the actual nervous system and the firing of the nervous system doesn't need the brain to figure it out. It doesn't need the brain to say anything to it or tell anything to it. In fact, the brain will just confuse the situation. What the body needs is physical presence. Coming in contact with the breath calms the nervous system. Coming in contact with our hands on our thighs, with the feeling of our feet on the ground. When you're walking around the city, which will happen again, I promise you, and your brain starts to get speedy and up here, come back to the feeling of the feet on the floor. Because no matter how brilliant your mind is and how wonderful New York is and the profusion of situations that are happening up in the brain, there's an animal down here that's getting freaked out. And that animal, that physical being, needs our attention too. And to bring the mind back to the feeling of our feet on the ground, the feeling of ourself sitting on the chair. A great technique for writers, to bring yourself back to the feeling of the pen in your hand or your fingers on the keyboard, whatever it is. But the actual physical element. I also coach public speaking for people and performance. And it's so important. People are like, well, how will I remember all the blah, blah, blah? And they're thinking of all these things. And what if the people don't like me? And what if, and it's all up here, right? the fact is, what they really need to do, and what most people need to do, is just be conscious of their feet on the ground. Be conscious of their body being still and aligned and free of tension. To be present. A great example that I like to give to public speakers is that when people are up in their head, they're all talking up here, and it's all like up here and this and that, and it could even be brilliant up there. You know, Robin Williams could live up there, and you know, and there's lots of kind of brilliant stuff up there, but you don't really believe it, you know, until it comes down here. But when the body speaks, people feel safe and they feel connected. And there's a warmth and sort of human quality to our experience. Well, that's the same thing that we could do in our life to begin to navigate all the crazy confluences of the situation of our world. We could find the ballast, find the balance. The other way the metaphor works, of course, is cruising down the river, that if the posture is off, then we begin to sway one way or another, either toward depression or toward arrogance, right? Either the posture is too high or it's too collapsed, and then we lose our way. But the middle way, which is the prescribed path that the apparently Buddha recommended, but his first students were very big on this idea of the middle way, is being between arrogance and depression, this idea that we actually can hold ourselves upright and just be present in the middle of our life. Well, here's the interesting thing, because if you're overwhelmed and you're freaked out, the remedy, what I would recommend, is that actually you do what you would do very naturally in meditation, you do in your life. Don't make the freak out worse by letting the body freak out, right? Or letting the heart freak out. Walking down the road in terrible posture, sitting there imagining how you could get out of the city and should be living at the beach somewhere, doesn't really help you pay attention to what's actually happening in the present moment. It doesn't allow the mind to be able to settle to what's really going on, which is the best way for the mind to work when it's just here. So what's the first step? Settle the body. Bring your attention back to your feet, back to your posture. Second, open the body. Feel your heart center. Allow yourself to really begin to feel comfortable and connected to your present moment. And then the mind can just open and relax. It can just be here now. So mind like a big open blue sky, heart like the radiant sun, body like the connection to the river flowing, keeping the posture middle way. Before we end the discussion, I wanted to mention that the three specific tiers that get mentioned in particularly Tibetan Buddhism, but also yoga. So I believe it probably comes from the ancient Indian systems. And, you know, Tibetan Buddhism actually comes from most directly from Indian Buddhism, even though it was the last of the Buddhisms, and Buddhism had existed everywhere else before it finally took hold in Tibet. The reason being is Tibet had a very rich spiritual tradition of its own, and it resisted the Indian systems until it could assimilate it in a way that combined it into what's called Vajrayana Buddhism, very much the indigenous cultural traditions of Tibet mixed with the sensibilities of the Indian tradition, if you will. But one thing that is common in Tibetan Buddhism, but also in yoga, is this idea of the triadic system, that you have the body, you have the spirit, or which is called sometimes speech, body, speech, and mind, if you've heard that. And then you've got mind, right? And that these are different strata of our actual brain, right? The body is this physical being that really doesn't have a higher cognitive awareness. It has physical reality. And then you have the midbrain, the hippocampus, the emotional brain, which gets likened to early childhood or like the inner child, if you will, or our mammalian sense of feeling, comfort, needs, wants, desires. And then you've got the totalitarian big brain, which is the last thing that was developed in our evolution. And also the last thing that's developed in our individual life. I don't know if you know that, but the higher cortexes aren't fully developed until we get to about 23 to 25 years old, maybe even 28 years old, between 23 and 28 years old. And fun fact, apparently women are on the younger end and men are on the slower end, and women gain that higher cerebral processing power a few years before men do on average. So the idea there, getting the gender specifics out of the aside, as being a conversation we don't really want to go into just now, but the idea, though, is that that higher cerebral cortex is our processing power. It is also our defensive mechanism, which is strange, right? Yes, it composed Shakespeare. Yes, it flew us to the moon. Yes, it understands the vagaries and the weight of the sun. But what it really is used for most of the time is to out-strategize danger, is to maneuver danger. So you could say that we lost our fangs and our claws and our scales, and what we gained was this higher processing power that allowed us to be able to outsmart danger, so to speak, to stay a step ahead of it, right? Isn't that cool? Unfortunately, we're still doing it. Whereas somebody once said, a neuroscientist, Rick Hansen, I think, is the one that said we were running away from tigers in our ancient system, but we're still running away from tigers even when there are no tigers. And that could have been actually Peter Levine. But the idea that we're constantly still using our brain to get out of danger is sort of tragic, because that's what we do. We're just constantly working, strategizing, figuring out how to make things work, and we're not letting the brain do what it really can do beautifully, which is just relax and open and see. In Buddhist tradition, they call that wisdom, that we actually can open our mind to wisdom. Now, for our purposes today, what I want to suggest is that we can't do that. We can't get the mind to go from its defensive scrambling to its clear blue sky wisdom if the body isn't stable and if the heart isn't relaxed and open, okay? So the work for us is to keep our feet on the floor, to bring our breath back to the body so that we can relax and open and feel our natural compassion, to actually see if we can't maybe fall in love with our life. And then the mind sort of follows at that point and can be clear. Instead of being so mind-centric about everything, the idea is to bring it all together. And the combining force, the point that brings it all together is the heart center, that connection, joining heaven and earth, joining body and mind, right here in the heart, bringing yourself back to right here, right now, in a physical sense.